There is a story about Harald that the Norse sources tell without apparent discomfort. He was besieging a town in Denmark. The town had good walls, sufficient supplies, and a garrison that had decided it could outlast him. Harald had been outside the walls for weeks. His men were restless. The siege was going nowhere. He sent a message to the town's leaders. He told them he was dying. He asked, as a dying man, to be given Christian burial inside the town's church, a request that the rules of medieval Christian hospitality made difficult to refuse without significant moral cost. The town led his funeral procession through the gates. The coffin bearers set the coffin down inside the church. The coffin opened. Harald was inside it, alive, armed. The town fell. This is the man who ruled Norway for 20 years. Not the philosophical warrior of the Byzantine Guard. Not the lovesick poet of the gammon visor. The man who faked his own death to take a town. The man who understood that winning was the only thing that mattered and that the methods used to win were a secondary consideration. He had a name for this approach. Everyone else had a name for him. Hardrada, the hard ruler. He ruled Norway for 20 years with an iron fist, fought Denmark for 15 of them, burned towns that resisted him, and built a kingdom that his son would rule for decades after him. History skips this part because Stamford Bridge is more dramatic. It shouldn't skip it. This is the episode about what Harald actually was when he wasn't fighting famous battles. Subscribe, like the video, and let's get into it. The coffin story is not unique in the medieval sources. Variants of it appear in the Norse sagas attached to several different commanders. It was, apparently, a recognized tactical approach rather than a unique Harald innovation. What makes the Harald version significant is not its originality but its illustration of something consistent in how Harald approached problems. He used whatever worked. The Byzantine military system had taught him this with a clarity that the Norse martial tradition, with its emphasis on honor, reputation, and the specific aesthetics of how a fight should be conducted, sometimes obscured. In Byzantium, a siege that could be ended by deception was preferable to a siege that required costly assault. A battle avoided through diplomacy was better than a battle won through bloodshed. The goal was the outcome, not the method. Harald had internalized this completely. It made him, by Norse standards, occasionally dishonorable. It made him, by any military standard, extraordinarily effective. The towns that fell to the coffin trick stayed fallen. The sieges that ended through deception produced the same result as sieges that ended through assault. A town under Harald's control, its resources available to his campaign, its population aware that resistance had a cost. The method was less important than the outcome. He applied this logic across his entire reign. 15 years. From 1047 to 1062, Harald and Sweyn Estridsson fought a war that the sources document with a specific Norse enthusiasm for naval combat. The longship engagements in the waters between Norway and Denmark, the raids on coastal settlements, the burning of towns, the back and forth of two determined men who both had legitimate grievances and neither of whom was going to acknowledge it. The war produced no decisive result for most of its duration. This was partly geography. The Norwegian-Danish frontier was long, coastline dominated, and impossible to hold permanently with the military technology available. A force that lost a battle could withdraw, regroup, and return. A town that was burned could be rebuilt. The sea that separated the two kingdoms was also the highway that connected them, making sustained occupation of the other's territory nearly impossible. It was also partly the specific military balance between the two men. Sweyn was a competent commander. He had been fighting for his throne since before Harald returned from Byzantium. He knew the Danish coastline and the political geography of his kingdom as well as Harald knew the Norwegian one. He could not beat Harald in a direct confrontation. The evidence of the war's progression is clear on this point, but he could avoid being destroyed, which was sufficient to keep the war going. The most significant engagement of the war came in 1062. The Battle of Nisa, fought in the Nisa River in what is now Sweden, was the largest naval battle in Norse history to that point. Harald assembled a fleet of somewhere between 150 and 300 longships. Sweyn met him with a comparable force. The battle lasted from afternoon into the night. Harald won. Sweyn escaped. The sources record that he fled the battle disguised as a common sailor, which suggests either genuine disguise or that the chaos of a night naval battle made identification impossible. His fleet was destroyed. His position was militarily catastrophic. He did not surrender. The war with Denmark was not all of Harald's reign. It was the dramatic element that the sources emphasize because naval battles and coastal raids generate better saga material than administrative reform. But Harald was governing Norway simultaneously, building the kingdom that the Antonine dynasty had built Rome, brick by systematic brick. He founded Bergen. The city that would become one of the most important trading ports in northern Europe was established by Harald around 1070. The sources debate the exact date, but the foundation is credited to him. He understood, with the commercial intelligence of a man who had seen Constantinople's trading system from the inside, that Norway's economic future was maritime and that a proper trading port on the western coast would generate the kind of systematic wealth that raiding could not. He standardized weights and measures across Norway. He reformed the coinage, introducing more consistent Norwegian silver coins that made domestic commerce more reliable and international trade more straightforward. He built churches. Not out of deep personal piety. The sources suggest Harald's Christianity was more political than devotional, the faith of a king who understood that the church was an administrative and political infrastructure rather than a personal spiritual commitment. But he built them because churches were the nodes of the administrative network that connected a kingdom, the places where records were kept, where disputes were adjudicated, where royal authority was made visible in stone. He was building a state. Not the Norse confederation of chieftains and jarls that Norway had always been, the system that had made his half-brother Olaf's reign impossible. A state with consistent administration, consistent law, consistent royal authority that extended to the edges of the kingdom rather than stopping at the boundaries of the nearest powerful jarl's personal territory. He was doing it with the specific brutality that the task required. The name Hardrada was not a compliment. It was an assessment. Harald ruled Norway the way maniacs had commanded armies, with an absolute insistence on results, a complete intolerance for resistance, and a willingness to apply whatever force was necessary to produce compliance. Chieftains who refused to acknowledge royal authority found their estates burned. Towns that resisted taxation found themselves without walls. Men who challenged Harald's legal decisions found themselves without the specific things that Norse law was supposed to protect. The sources record specific incidents. A Norwegian chieftain named Einar Thamberskelfer, one of the most powerful men in Norway, a man whose political influence had been significant enough to shape Norwegian politics for a generation, was killed by Harald in a confrontation in 1050 that the sources describe as judicial murder. Einar had publicly challenged Harald's authority. Harald had him killed at a meeting called specifically for the purpose of resolving the dispute. The message was understood. Norwegian chieftains adjusted their understanding of what challenging Harald's authority meant. This was not popular. It was effective. The same pattern that had produced results in Sicily and Bulgaria, the complete willingness to use maximum force when minimum force was insufficient, produced results in Norway. The kingdom became more unified, more administratively coherent, more capable of projecting military power beyond its borders. It also became, for the men who had lived in the older Norway of independent chieftains and negotiated royal authority, considerably less free. Harald kept poets. This is a detail that complicates the simple picture of the hard ruler, the brutal pragmatist who burned towns and killed chieftains and ran his kingdom like a Byzantine military campaign. The Norse skaldic tradition was the journalism, the history, and the public relations of the Viking Age simultaneously. Skalds composed verses about the events of their patrons' reigns, verses that were performed at court, memorized by audiences, and transmitted across generations as the primary record of what had happened and how it should be understood. Harald took this seriously. He maintained several skalds at his court throughout his reign. The verses they composed about his campaigns, the Danish wars, the early battles, the administrative achievements, survive in the sagas that Snorri Sturluson compiled 2 centuries later. They are the primary sources for much of what we know about Harald's reign. But Harald also composed poetry himself. Beyond the Gammelvisor, the poem cycle about Elisaveta that he had written during his Byzantine years, Harald composed verses about his own campaigns. The sources preserve fragments. They show a man who thought about his own story with the deliberate attention of someone who understood that stories were how history was made and that a king who controlled his own story controlled something more durable than a throne. He had been thinking about his story since he was 15. He was going to keep thinking about it until an arrow at Stamford Bridge ended the thinking. 1065 The war with Sweyn was finally over. Not ended in victory. The 15-year conflict concluded in a negotiated peace that gave Harald Norway and Sweyn Denmark, essentially the situation that had existed when the war began. Harald had won the Battle of Nisa, had demonstrated his military superiority repeatedly, and had not been able to convert military superiority into the political result he wanted because Sweyn simply would not yield. The peace was the acknowledgement of a stalemate that both sides had been too proud to name for 15 years. Harald was 50 years old. He had been fighting since he was 15. He had fought in Norway, Sweden, Russia, Anatolia, Sicily, Bulgaria, the Holy Land, Denmark, and the waters of the North Sea. He had accumulated more military experience than any man alive. He had built a kingdom and governed it with an iron fist for 20 years. He was not finished, because across the North Sea, in the richest kingdom in the Norse world's reach, something was happening. The English King Edward the Confessor was dying without an heir. And Harald Sigurdsson, Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, had a claim to the English throne that was technically legitimate, historically arguable, and militarily actionable. He started counting ships,